It is my honor to introduce to you two of our board members. They have worked really, really hard to bring this all together, including Reverend Dr. Barber. So may I introduce to you Joan McAllister and Manzoor Chima.
If you ever want to have a really good time, try figuring out how to explain this man in a very short piece of space, or to introduce him tonight. I'm honored to be asked to introduce Reverend Dr. Barber. I became involved in the Moral Monday movement last spring, and as the time has gone on, I have gained more and more respect for the work he's doing and for the bridges that he is building between people. So, I'm going to let Manzoor say something too.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. My name is Manzoor Chima. I'm board member of Triangle Interfaith Alliance. Our group, Triangle Interfaith Alliance, represents members of different faiths, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Native American. I'm sorry, I may forget even a few names, but and Baha'i, and many more. Please check out Sikh members, definitely Sikh members. But the reason we chose Reverend William Barber II to come today is because we believe that as people of faith, it's our primary duty to have a stance on social justice issues. That we cannot separate social justice from our religious obligation. That if I, as a Muslim, go to a mosque, but there's hunger in my background, in my mosque background, if there's injustice, if there's oppression, then I cannot call myself a Muslim. So we are greatly honored for Reverend William Barber to take a stance on the moral issues.
Good evening. Good evening. Quite a way to come into this room. I want to first of all thank God for the strength and the grace to be here tonight, to see so many of my friends. And I've just been on, we had to make an adjustment because Chris Hayes wanted us to be on tonight to rebut some things that are going on. As you know, doing this work is not without attacks, both verbally and otherwise. But it's really good to be here because I've also been hounded all day by Sean Hannity and that crowd. And they kind of get mad with me because I won't give them the kind of time they want. I tell them I'm not interested in FaceTime, and I'm surely not interested in just trying to have a conversation with people who are only trying to find out how much they can not allow a real conversation. But it's good to be here. And Joan, thank you so much for this gracious invitation. The old spiritual song says, "Walk with me, Lord, walk with me, while I'm on this tedious journey. I want the Lord to walk with me." Dr. King says that when he went to Montgomery, somebody asked him, how did he end up there? PhD, who had all kinds of office, to be at churches, 500 to 1,000 members. His real goal was to be the dean of the School of Religion at Morehouse, from which he graduated and eventually become president. And someone said, how did he come to Montgomery, where Morosa Parks had already been planning, E.D. Nixon had already been organizing, and Dexter Avenue Church was sitting there, and when you came out of the pulpit and outside the door, you looked right across the street and you saw the cradle of the Confederacy, where the president of the Confederacy had taken the oath of office, Jefferson Davis. And Dr. King said it was as though he was tracked down by what the Germans call the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. I believe that moral dissenters are a necessity for the destiny of our democracy, of our nation, and of our world. And that in a sense, every generation at some point is tracked down, pulled upon by something within, deep within, and from something above that calls us to take a stand in the times in which we live. The psalmist in the Jewish tradition in Psalm 94 wrote these words years ago. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? And who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Jesus, in his first public sermon, that by the way almost got him hung that very day, said these words, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me, and in the Message Bible it says, to declare good news to the poor, to announce pardon to the prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and the battered free, and to announce this is God's year to act. When we think about the psalmist raises a question for the ages. In a time of political oppression and systematic injustice, in a time when those in power were so drunk with their power that they were using it in ways to hurt the vulnerable, the psalmist says, who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will dissent? Now the psalmist is actually asking the question, God's question. The psalmist is saying that is God's question in every age. Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Now there is a tragedy in Psalm 94. And that is that God asked this question, according to the Jewish writer, because God is feeling a sense of lostness, which is interesting when God feels lost. Because God is confused in Psalm 94. He says, I know I have some people here that I delivered from bondage in Egypt. I know I have some people that know what it's like to be oppressed. And I can't figure out why they're not standing up in their particular historical moment. And the psalmist goes on to say that if God, him or herself, had not stood up in that moment, then nobody would have risen to engage in a moral dissent against the injustice of that time. In Luke's text, Jesus rises as a dissenter in the middle of a ghetto city named Nazareth that existed in the midst of Roman domination. It was a society built of deep divisions and social stratification. Philip Eastler wrote a little book, and he says, in the time of Luke, the 1% ruled with pride and arrogance over the 99%. Social Darwinism was the order of the day. It was a time when the sick were left to fend for themselves. The jobless were called by Cicero, the great poet, the dregs of the city. And the poor were seen as a nuisance and not neighbors by the ruling, wealthy, and political elites. And Jesus goes to the ghetto where he was born. Doesn't have to go there, that's where he was born. He comes back and he raises a moral dissent. And he declares that those who have been pushed to the side by political powers of his day and by the religionists who supported the political power and provided cover for injustice, those who had been dismissed, disdained, and disregarded by the politics of his day were in fact the center of God's moral agenda and the ways of righteousness. In fact, the poor in Luke's text, when you examine that word in Greek, comes from a word patokos, which means those who have been literally made to bend over and bow because of the systemic policies and decision by those in power. And to these poor, the patokos, Jesus brings the good news, which is dissent, a dissent to the bad news of the ruling order. He brings a prophetic vision that is as old as the Old Testament prophets. Walter Brueggemann says, the prophetic voice, the prophetic voice of dissent is not so much issue-based. It accomplishes the harder, more necessary work of reframing the big picture of what is at stake so that we can take in the reality of our moment in a new way with a new sense of what might be possible. He goes on to say, another scholar, Irving Jensen, says, the task of the prophetic critique is to simultaneously criticize and energize while working toward the formation of new community. The task of the prophetic moral dissent or critique is to nurture, nourish, and to invoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Then Brueggemann again suggests that the prophetic ministry and the moral calling should not only criticize social and spiritual shortcomings, but should also energize people with hope that alternatives are possible. The prophetic voice seeks to penetrate despair so that new futures can be believed and embraced by us. So the prophetic voice that dissents in the face of oppression does not even ask if the vision can be implemented. For the questions of implementation, says Brueggemann, are of no consequence until the vision can be imagined. The imagination must come before implementation. So then hope in this context as a form of moral dissent is the refusal to accept the reading of reality, which is the majority opinion. And one does that only at great political and existential risk. But on the other hand, this kind of hope is subversive, for it limits the grandiose potential of the present, and it dares to dissent and dares to announce to the present that the things to which we have all made commitments to has now been called into question, and a new reality is possible if only we believe. So the prophetic role of dissenting is God's way of saying there is another way. There is a better way. There is a way that stands in contrast to the ways of domination, destruction, and injustice. And my friend, moral dissent is not just a call of the psalmist or Jesus. It is the calling of so much of our faith traditions. Is it not the words of the Quran that says, and O my people, give just measure and weight, nor withhold from the people the things that they are due. Commit not evil in the land with intent to do mischief. That which is left you by Allah is best for you, if you but believe. Was it not Mahatma Gandhi that called us not to put our trust in physical force, but Satyagraha, soul force, and to challenge the very vision of domination and declare that that vision is faulty and another vision is possible. The case of moral dissent is as old as abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. One time, when he was being lynched by a pro-slavery mob in Boston, of all places, Garrison wrote on the wall of his cell, William Lloyd Garrison was put into his cell Wednesday afternoon, October 21st, 1835, to save him from the violence of a respectable and influential mob who sought to destroy him for preaching the abominable and dangerous doctrine that all men are equal. That's moral dissent. Another writer says that we need to remember that in 1846, when Mexican forces had fired on American troops that had been sent across the disputed Mexican border to provoke such an incident, President James Knox Polk asked the congregation for a declaration of war. American blood, he proclaimed, had been shed on American soil. It was a freshman congressman from Illinois that dissented, sarcastically criticizing the president's policy by introducing the so-called spot resolution, which would have required Polk to travel to Mexico to point out the exact spot on American soil where this had taken place. Now, his dissent was defeated. But Congressman Abraham Lincoln revealed what moral dissent requires in the face of injustice. Henry David Thoreau, also protesting the war with Mexico, refused to pay a poll tax because he could not in good conscience support an imperialistic government that sought to expand the institution of slavery into new territory. He was arrested. And after his arrest, he wrote on resistance to civil government. And he said, where there is an unjust law, like the laws legalizing the institution of slavery, then it is the duty, the moral duty of every just man to break that law. A true patriot would not allow injustice to stand. His friend, the story says, Ralph Waldo Emerson, visited him the night he spent in jail and said, Henry, what are you doing in there? Someone of your standing and your character. To which Henry Thoreau replied, Ralph, what are you doing out there in a time like this? Why are you not taking your moral stand? 1896 Supreme Court Justice John Harlan provided the only vote of dissent in the Plessy versus Ferguson case. It became the position that we, the NAACP, built our case on and eventually won Brown versus Board of Education. But listen at his dissent. He says, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior dominant ruling class of citizens. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The umbilus is the peer of the most powerful. The arbitrary separation of citizens on the basis of race is wholly inconsistent with the civil freedom and the equality before the law established by the Constitution, and it cannot be justified upon any legal grounds. Moral dissent. When Dr. King, 50 years ago, was under heavy criticism about going to Birmingham, he was called an outsider. He said, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is in Birmingham. I'm compelled to carry the gospel of freedom far beyond my own hometown. And when it comes to injustice, it is not regulated by boundaries. And all of us should stand up and speak against injustice. And as recently as Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she became the voice of moral and constitutional dissent when she wrote about the terrible Voting Rights Act decision by the majority in the Shelby case, June 25th of last year. Listen what she says. She says, hubris, pride, is a fit word for today's demolition of the Voting Rights Act. And she went on to talk about the law. And then, as though the spirit of the time got a hold of Justice Bader Ginsburg, she moved from the law to a higher law. And from the bench, she reminded the court of the Bloody Sunday campaign for the voting rights in Selma, Alabama. She quoted Dr. King, and she looked at the Supreme Court justices who 5 of them who felt as though they had the ability, the power to undermine voting rights, and she declared something higher. She said, let us not forget, no matter what you have done here today, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. She brings that great universalist quote right into the center of this public debate going on in the Supreme Court. Moral dissenters are in good company. I could list a lot more. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Cesar Chavez, on and on. But what I do believe, first of all, is that we are in a moment where we're called once again to answer the question of the psalmist. Who will rise up for me against those who do wrong? And who will stand against the workers of iniquity? Now that's the part about why we are. But the other side of this, my friends, tonight, I want to talk about a little bit about where we are in history. Because like the Sankofa bird of Africa, I believe you have to sometimes go forward, but fly forward by looking backwards. That things don't just happen in a vacuum. And it's important that we understand some past history to understand some of the things we're seeing right now in the public arena. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to examine, while briefly, the history of the first and second reconstructions in this country. 1868, if you go back in time, a preacher named J.W. Hood, who later became the president Livingstone College, stood on the floor of North Carolina's Constitutional Convention as we were trying to write a new constitution to move us from the low grounds of slavery and degradation to a higher ground of injustice and full citizenship. And as a moral agent, as a preacher, he said this in 1868, "Gentlemen of the convention, there has never been, and there will probably never be again so important assemblage of the colored people of North Carolina as the present in its influence upon the destinies of the people for all time to come. Let us have faith and patience and moderation, yet assert always that there are three things that we must have. First, the right to give evidence in the court. Second, the right to be represented in the jury box. And third, the right to put votes in the ballot box. These rights we want, these rights we contend for, and these rights under God we must ultimately have." And with that kind of moral framing, he and another minister, Samuel Ashley, worked to rewrite North Carolina's Constitution. They worked to ensure that there was an equal protection clause in North Carolina's Constitution before the 14th Amendment was written. They worked to ensure that North Carolina had a constitutional right to public education in our Constitution 146 years ago using this kind of frame. They worked to outlaw secret societies in this state, like terrorist groups and others in the Klan, using this moral framework. In fact, after he said that, listen at this language. This is the language of 146 years ago of our Constitution, that every legislature puts their hand on the right hand on the Bible and left hand to God. And this is what they swear to do. We hold, this is the preamble, we hold it to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Then they swear this when it comes to political power. Article 1, Section 2. All political power is vested in and derived from the people, and all government of right originates from the people and is found upon their will only and is instituted solely for the good of the whole. And with that kind of framework, all over the South, black and white people came together, rooted in deep faith, built fusion coalition, took over Southern legislators, rewrote Constitution, and they forged an agenda to ensure for all people voting rights, educational rights, fair tax policy, labor rights, and equal protection under the law. But within 4 years, this moral vision towards a more perfect nation was under attack. A group rose up in around 1870 and they called themselves the Redeemers. Sounds kind of religious. Redeemers. And they said that they were going to initiate the redemption movement. Listen at their language, though. You might have heard it today. They said their goal was to take back America. Their goal was to redeem America from the influence of black and white coalition politics. They launched a frontal attack. And the strategy they used, the first attack to take back America, to take back educational rights from all people, to take voting rights, was they attacked voting rights. They attacked tax revenue and government programs and agencies designed to promote social uplift. They attacked public education. They attacked labor rights. And they attacked and assassinated white and black progressive leaders. In 1896, and they took over the courts. By 1896, they had so much power in the court that they ruled on Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. And in 1898, there was a riot in Wilmington, November the 10th, 1898. And that riot was consecrated in pulpits, where preachers literally got up and said, "For the sake of God and the preservation of the government of the white man, even if we have to fill the Cape Fear River with blood, let it be so, and let it be done." And it was done. And nearly 3% of Wilmington was killed. More people killed per capita, some say, than in September 11th, 9/11, per capita. And effectively, that shut down the first Reconstruction. Then you get the second Reconstruction, 1954. You get Brown versus Board of Education. Thurgood Marshall goes into the court. He argues the law, but he also argues morality. He says to the court, there's no way you can rule that separate but equal meets our highest morals test and our highest standards. He said that cannot be the case. He wins the case. Emmett Till is then killed, 1955. Rosa Parks sees his death in the open casket of his mother, and she says she's got to do something. And she begins the process of being in training. Don't ever think the movement just happened because she got up one morning and got tired. Second Reconstruction, fusion politics rises again. Blacks, whites, Latinos, women now come together, 1954, 1968. Think about all of the things that began to happen during that period that were rooted in a moral framework. Affirmative action, Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. The Social Security Act was amended 1954 to include people in the domestic community and I don't know if I can do that. Domestic community and the agrarian community. Things like preschool and kindergarten and minimum wage were all couched in moral language. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which helped women and African Americans, was couched as a moral issue. Voting Rights Act, a moral issue. President Johnson, August 6, 1965, says, a moral triumph for freedom as huge as any victory that has ever been won on the battlefield. Fusion politics was taking our nation forward. What happened? There comes a rise again to deconstruct the Reconstruction. And you get this guy by the name of Kevin Phillips. He comes up with this strategy called the White Southern Strategy. It's put out there to deliberately design to play the race card in a way that drives Southern whites from voting, and it's put out there as a way to move the moral discussion from civil rights and economics to things like prayer in the school, abortion, and homosexuality, and where you stand on homosexuality. Lee Atwater, you remember in 1978, told on the whole plan in an interview. It's on the internet, where he says, you know, you start out in 1954 saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't do that. That hurts, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, cutting taxes. It's abstract, but all of the things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is that it hurts blacks worse than whites, but it also causes many Southern whites to vote against their own best interests. And that strategy worked. It worked to the point that in 1980, when Ronald Reagan used it, where did he announce his presidential campaign? Philadelphia, Mississippi. Right with Swanner, Chicken, and Good. And he used all of the lingo and the language of the white Southern strategy. He called the Civil Rights Act bad legislation. He called the Voting Rights Act a misuse of states' rights, a trumping of state rights. He criticized safety nets. He colored all of these programs as being an entitlement program that were just helping minorities. And he won the South in a landslide. And the solid South became the solid South. That ended the second Reconstruction almost fully. And then in 2008, you have something strange happen. You have a guy named Barack Obama to run for president in 2008. He runs a campaign like fusion politics. He wins in North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia. But it's not so much just him. It's the electorate. It's broad, it's black, it's Hispanic, it's Asian, it's people who want to push America beyond the vestiges of racism. It's gay, it's straight, it's people of faith, people not of faith, it's Republican, it's Democrat. And it happens. And in some sense, it signals a third Reconstruction. And it just might work this time. The demographics all over the South have shifted. And if you change the South, you fundamentally change the nation. So what do we see immediately in the wake of his? Some of the same tactics of the redemption movement in the 1800s, the white Southern strategies in the 1900s. We see an attack, an all-out assault. And where does that attack start? It starts with voting rights. It starts with labor rights. It starts by naming the us versus them and who's entitled to certain help, and trying to play that fear that somebody who's getting a benefit from a safety net is taking something from other people. Now you say, well, we brought you to talk about Moral Monday. See, here's the problem, my friend. If you try to talk about Moral Monday in a vacuum without understanding history, you miss it. It's not spontaneous. And that's why I couldn't bumper sticker that, and I hope y'all give me a little time to work to where I gotta go now. because you gotta hear this history. And see, in 2006, before Moral Monday, we saw this fusion movement. We built this fusion movement called Historic Thousand on Jones Street. And we built it around a deeply moral, deeply constitutional, state-led, agenda-based, 14-point agenda that we believe could move us forward and bring us together around these 5 issues: economic sustainability, ending poverty, educational equality for all, health care for all, fairness in the criminal justice system, and defending and expanding voting rights, immigrant rights, LGBT rights, and workers' rights. And with that framework and an agenda and action step, we won. We won same-day registration. We won early voting. We won an increase in minimum wage in North Carolina before the federal government did. We won an earned income tax credit. We won more money for child health services. We pushed the governor to veto voter ID. We pushed our senator, at least one of them, to support the Affordable Care Act. But then in 2010, what do we see? A pushback. Because any time this nation, and particularly the southern states, begin to reconstruct themselves, there is always going to be a pushback. It's social physics. So in 2010, we see a first pushback. What do they attack first? Voting rights. They can't do voter ID, so what do? They do redistricting that stacks, packs, and locks black people, 52% of blacks in the 27 House district, 49% of blacks in the 19 of Senate district, designed to so isolate the black vote that it undermines the ability for black and white people and other people to work together to bring fusion coalitions into the political arena in ways that transforms the look and the policies of our General Assembly. And then in 2012, we see 2013, we saw an all-out pushback. Even though 120,000 more people voted for progressive, more people voted, but less progressives were elected. And as soon as they get the reign, even after we met with the governor and asked him to line up with this 5-point, not Republican agenda or Democrat agenda, but moral agenda, the first 50 days, we see a pushback. And they began to do it in such an extreme way. And we believe we are called to a deeply moral interpretation of public policy, and we must destroy the myth. The greatest myth of our time is that extreme policies only hurt a small subset of people. The fact of the matter is, it hurts everybody. So we are called to a deeply moral and constitutional vision of society that demands that we focus on our deepest spiritual values about faith and justice and how we treat the poor and the stranger and women and children, and our deepest constitutional values. How do we treat least of these, and how do we maintain a government for the good of the whole? And so in this moment, when we're in the middle of an attempt to deconstruct Reconstruction once again, that's the point. In this moment, when we're in the middle of such a pushback, first of all, we should have expected it. If you understand history, then you expect it. And then secondly, it's no need to be depressed by it, because it's going to happen. Instead, what we must be informed by is the pushback is the sign for our pushing forward. In other words, the very fact that there's a pushback is the signal that people of faith are needed like never before. Because whenever there's a pushback, as old as the psalmist, God is still asking that question: who will stand up for me? And who will take on the work of the enemy? You see, we must be the group of people that declare some things transcend political majority. Some things are bigger than Democrat and Republican, liberal. You notice I never use that language, because liberal versus conservative is too puny. Am I liberal or conservative? Depending on if you serve and ketchup or hot sauce. It really depends. It's not about Republican and Democrat. There are some things that must be challenged because they are constitutionally inconsistent, they are morally indefensible, and they are economically insane. It's extreme, it's constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and economically insane to cut Medicaid for 500,000 people just because it's just wrong. It's not Democrat or Republican. To know that you're writing a policy that will cause 2,800 people to die To know that you're going to cost this state 30 or 40,000 jobs just because you don't like the policies of a president who happens to be of ebony hue. It's wrong, it's extreme to raise taxes on 900,000 poor working people just so you can give 23 of the wealthiest families a tax break. That's not Democrat, that's not Republican, it's just wrong. In fact, the reason I know it's not Republican is because, first of all, Teddy Roosevelt first talked about full coverage of Americans in health care, and Ronald Reagan was an endorser of earned income tax credit. So anytime you can make Teddy Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan look like some extreme liberal, you really have gone extreme. It's extreme to take 170,000 people's unemployment in a state where the Constitution says you have a right to the fruit of your own labor. When you kick people when they're already down and abuse them when you're already down, and then say, as our governor said, this is necessary evil. Well, when that happens, there are people of faith that must stand up and say, Governor, we love you, but evil is not necessary. It's a choice. It's a choice. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's extreme to play fracking for dollars without groundwater. Poison the water knowing how it may hurt people. It's extreme. It's wrong to dismantle our public schools and then to try to turn them over to private companies, particularly in the South. Particularly in the South, after Supreme Court decision in '54, North Carolina came up with a plan called the Pearsall Plan, which said back then, if you don't want to comply with the law, you can get tax dollars and go to private school. We've been down this road before. Is something wrong with taking $10 million of your tax dollar and giving it to a private company where there are no provisions or guarantees against segregation and no guarantees on teacher certification? Is something wrong when in 1 year you drive our educational commitment to students lower than Mississippi and Alabama? North Carolina is now 48th in the nation. The only states lower than us in per pupil spending is Texas and Arizona. Is something wrong with that when our deepest moral traditions tell us it would be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and let somebody throw you in the river than to offend one of the little ones? It's wrong. It's wrong for you to attack the right to vote. It's morally wrong, constitutionally inconsistent. It's wrong when the right to vote was won through blood, sweat, and tears. There's something wrong when one of the leaders of the extreme, Tea Party extremists says this on camera. If what we have done hurts a bunch of students, so be it. If it hurts Democrats, so be it. If it hurts a bunch of blacks that just want free stuff from the government, so be it. And the cameraman says, do you realize you're on camera? It's wrong when Senator Apodaca said, when Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was overturned, when he said, now that the headache has been removed. Wait a minute. You're describing the Voting Rights Act that was won through the blood of those 4 little girls blown up in a Birmingham church, won through the blood of Swanner, Cheney, and Goodman, who were killed 50 years ago this year, won through the blood of Medgar Evers, who was shot through the back in front of his family, won through the blood of a universalist named Viola Lewusa that was killed as she was transporting marchers in the march from Selma to Montgomery. You describe the Voting Rights Act as a headache? When Democrats and Republicans signed off on the Voting Rights Act in 1965? Oh, there must be somebody, people of faith, who stand up and challenge this kind of immoral activity. Finally, my brother, we must be the one, based in our faith, that says there's a better way. If our values are right and our budgets are just, we can support and pay our children. We can pay workers a fair share. We can have budgets that have surpluses and not deficits. We can give people labor rights. We can insure the unemployed. We can give the sick adequate health care. We can protect the environment, and we can overturn the injustices of our judicial system, and we can reject hate and division and mean attempts to write people out of our constitutional protection because of their race, their creed, their sexual orientation, or their income. Somebody must declare that there is a better way, and there's nobody but us. If you've been looking for the who that should be doing it, we are the who that must do it now. We must declare. How can you sing in America, 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 God shed his grace on thee, and then you not be graceful and merciful to immigrants in a nation of immigrants? So we have to declare in this moment. We can't rest. We are called in every age to somebody must stand up to Pharaoh. Somebody must stand up and speak truth to power. Somebody must take on the Goliath of arrogant politics. Somebody must refuse to accept sinister situation. And somebody must take on unjust policies. And I tell you, my brothers and sisters, after doing 16 city tours in the last 7 days, before getting here tonight, people are ready. There's an army rising. There's an army rising, nonviolent army rising, people that are sick and tired of this kind of immoral extremism. I was in Brevard County the other night, 98% white, 89% Republican, 750 people showed up of all different races, creeds, colors, and parties. They're tired of it. The question is what God said. Are we tired? As people of faith, will we take our stand, not in hate, but in love? Do we love this present age enough to tell them the truth? Do we love this present age? Do we love these political leaders enough to say, wait a minute, do you realize that only if you help somebody will your living not be in vain? Do we love them enough to say what Jesus said in his last sermon headed to the Christ? Woe unto those who tithe but leave undone the more weightier matters of the law. Can we be the Isaiahs of today, like Isaiah in Isaiah 10, when he said, woe unto those who make unjust laws and rob the poor of their right and make the widows pray? Can we do that? I want to suggest we have no alternative. We must stand. Too many tears have been cried, too much blood has been shed. And we are called to stand now, and we are declared that on our watch, we will never lose faith, and we will never turn back, and we will never give up on our rights ordained by God, guaranteed by our Constitution. Not now, not ever. And if we do, we will do more than just make a political statement. We'll make a spiritual statement. Let me close with a letter that was given to me at one of the Moral Mondays, after one of the with my new friend. Reverend, this is your sister. We've met several times, but I know you meet many, so you may not remember. I know what a busy person you are, and I know that you may not see this letter for a long time, if at all. But it was laid on my heart to write this to you. I could tell my friends and family the things I'm going to tell you, but they would not feel it like you will. The understanding can only be gotten from you and people of faith. So here I am, ready to bear my heart to you because of one simple reason. Moral Monday in this movement has changed my life. I say that with every ounce of sincerity I have in my heart. I grew up in a non-practicing Jewish home. I struggled with God and belief my entire life. As I became an adult, I'm now 34, I became an atheist. And not just any atheist, but a militant one. Even as I professed that this is who I was, I felt an inner struggle. I wanted so much to believe in something higher than myself, but I just could not dismiss logic, and I still cannot. However, from you and the other people of faith at the Moral Monday, I've learned that I don't have to dismiss logic. I don't have to dismiss logic in order to believe in something greater than myself. You have showed me that I was not really mad with God. I was mad at the idea of God that's been presented, a God of hate, a God of meanness, a God that supports and consecrates injustice. And so, you all have showed me a different way. You've helped me to remove hate from my heart and fill it with love and hope. For all this and more, I thank you. And whenever I feel burnt out and tired of fighting for something better, I go to the YouTube and I watch a Moral Monday event. It picks me up every time. And that's what I did this morning before I got out of bed. You have put something back in my life where there was an empty hole. The reason I'm telling you this, aside from thanking you, is because I know that what you all are doing, sometimes you all feel like you're fighting a losing battle, no matter what you do. I know from experience that sometimes it can feel as that you have not or not making a difference in the lives of others when you're trying to do so hard. As a human being, I know that you and other people of faith must have these type of days. This is why I wanted you to know, even if you ever feel that you've not made enough of a difference, you are touching lives everywhere. You go and you have changed mine and the way I see the world and God forever. Yes, Reverend, I say God. So if you're ever in a doubting mode, remember me and know that you do make a difference. Your new sister in the faith. Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? I've got a feeling, I've got a real good feeling, that all of us in here and so many more are going to accept our prophetic call to be moral descendants. And because each of you have lived this state, this country, this world, is